Today we have an amazing guest, Catherine Keller. Catherine is one of the leading theologians in our time. She has been a huge influence on many students, younger and older theologians, and she is giving us this time with enthusiasm. I want to share something personal first. Catherine and I were in school together, so we were working on our PhDs at the same time. She was the star of every class. And unlike many stars, she was also a very kind person. And she was very collaborative. So we collaborated on conferences and other kinds of things that we did for the Center for Process Studies. Over the years, I've realized that Catherine has mentored people with such commitment that her mentees, and that includes just young people who've known her a short period of time, as well as people who worked with her for years, her mentees are always dedicated to her and appreciative of what she did to help them fly. Catherine is professor of constructive theology at the Theological School of Drew University. She teaches and writes in the intersections of process ecological, feminist, political, and pluralist theologies. You can read the screen as I'm speaking, but I wanted you to know that wide range of areas that she covers, because one of Catherine's gifts is that she is alert to all the theological movements that are coming up across the world, with particular interest in the philosophical theologies. She is a true philosopher, a true theologian. And she addresses and engages with each of them. And in the process, she deepens process theologies, feminist theologies, political theologies, ecological theologies, and all the rest. So today we're in for a treat. She's the author of many books. Her Intercarnations was a huge hit when I used to teach process theology. And she has written No Matter What, Crisis and the Spirit of Planetary Possibility, and Facing Apocalypse, Climate, Democracy, and Other Last Chances. And I've already introduced you, Catherine, but the focus of the presentation is trees touching, Whitehead, Teilhard, and the matter of EcoCiv. We're in your hands, Catherine.
Thank you. I am so glad to join you all, each of you and all of you, for this conversation. And of course, I'm particularly grateful for Mary Elizabeth's friendship and for her leadership of process explorations, formerly Cobb and Friends, and always still Cobb and Friends. I was able to get to Claremont in February for the Cobb Memorial Service, and very grateful for Mary Elizabeth's part in that whole event. So much to love, so much to lose. that title of yours, Mary Elizabeth, probably sums up my talk, but I'll go ahead and give it anyway. And John Cobb has had more influence, I should say more positive influence, on my own formation than anyone. I was glad while visiting Claremont to get a long, slow walk in the Arboretum just this year, just before his service, and to sit for a while under a great oak tree. It felt like a chapel in the woods. So let the great oak be my metaphor for today, for John Cobb, and for the legacy and future of process thought. And I can't help saying a few words about trees and the matter of our ecology, which John Cobb warned about so prophetically half a century ago in that little book called Is It Too Late? Trees project a dignified image of slow and stable time, don't they? The opposite of too late. And they don't just offer meditation or beauty. As you well know, they are crucial to the drawing down and storing of excess carbon dioxide. So they constrain fossil fuel-driven global warming. And as you may remember, the first day in office, the US president not only withdrew from the Paris Agreement, but fired 3,400 Forest Service workers. And another directive opened half of our national forests for logging. He froze all foreign aid and with it billions in climate finance. He is axing climate change legislation and withholding federal funds from any grants that mention climate change. The cutting down of every kind of ecological policy is proceeding daily. And along with it, all manner of forest protection and replanting. The president seems to have forgotten even his own little gesture during his first term to plant some trees to take care of global warming. He's not even doing that. All of this eco cut down will drive more intense wildland fire seasons in California, in Canada, where I was just up for a talk, and wherever. Drill, baby, drill. Burn, baby, burn. In the United States, a vicious circle of ecology and politics is intensifying. Ecological degradation leads to extreme weather and rising seas, which force mass migration, which bolsters right-wing politics, which empowers climate denialism and environmental deregulation, and so leads to more eco-degradation and more migration. A truly vicious circle, really a spiral of the natural climate and the political climate, a double climate. I find it hard to avoid the language of apocalypse. But apocalyptic, of course, is often a way of saying, yeah, it is too late. And certainly in our earth-trumping climate, the language of the apocalypse and the shadow of too late can hardly be avoided. We won't be able to block out echoes of that ancient metaphor. And the apocalyptic literalism of white reactionary Christianity in the US remains indispensable to the political right, since it believes in the approaching end of the world. Ecology is irrelevant. Let it burn. But now there is an intensification of that political apocalypse. One reads, for example, of how the super rich are preparing their high-tech private domains as fortressed escape pods, giving them and their children an edge for an increasingly barbarous future, which, of course, they are driving. The richest 1% produce 50% more greenhouse gases than the bottom 50% of the population. And to put it bluntly, as Naomi Klein wrote last week, the most powerful people in the world are preparing for the end of the world, an end they themselves are frenetically accelerating. And as she puts it, though it builds on enduring right-wing tendencies, we simply have not faced such a powerful apocalyptic strain in government before. So the name of her article is disturbingly apt: The Rise of End Times Fascism. Right. But at the same time, I worry about how the secular left performs our own mimicry of the political apocalypse, in the assumption that floats around that it probably is too late, especially with climate change. And if it's too late, why seriously bother? So a kind of liberal nihilism mirrors in reverse the conservative denialism. And yet it is increasingly evident that climate has become a matter of collective life and death, if not for the Earth itself, certainly for many of its natural environments, as well as built ones making up our world. It is now clear that we cannot hold global warming to the 1.5 Celsius Paris Agreement, so keeping to 2 degrees rise by the end of the century seemed still possible, and not anymore. And now maybe 2.5. Oh, those loaded little numbers. and the quite possible 3 degrees Celsius average rise by 2100 would bring unthinkable devastation across the planet. Not the literal end of the world, but probably of what we call our world, our habitable planet. So it has seemed for a long time to me a bad idea just to dismiss apocalyptic language as histrionic, right-wing or left. I think it's probably more helpful to insist on the real meaning of apocalypse. Just etymologically, apocalypsis, does not mean the end of the world. It means unveiling, revelation, in the sense of disclosure, not closing down, but opening up, disclosing a vision of alternative possibility, the possibility of a radically transformed world, the ancient metaphor, therefore, of the new creation, in the language of the Hebrew prophets, the hope for a new heaven and earth, a new atmosphere and earth. And in the biblical tradition, the transformation only happens after catastrophic losses to the built and to the natural environments. So I will indulge in just this little bit, promise, just a little bit of apocalyptic citation. It's going to get us back to the trees. Revelation 8:7. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were hurled to the earth. Well, it's not hard to associate the hail, fire, blood mix with global warming, is it? But it's a free association. And the passage continues, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burnt up. Wait, a third of the trees were burned up? Well, that's a little creepy. Let me cite this current and totally secular bit of data from the World Research Institute. Fire is also making up a larger share of global tree cover loss compared to other drivers, like mining and forestry. While fires only accounted for about 20% of all tree cover loss in 2001, they now account for roughly 33%. This increase in fire activity has been starkly visible in recent years. End of quote. So here we are, not at the end of the world, but at 33%. Fire accounting for 1/3 of tree loss, all too literally. Whatever the author of Apocalypse intuited in his altered state of consciousness, our arboreal apocalypse has for some time been manifest in fully secular terms, and for a very long time, mostly ignored. Have you all heard of Charles Perkins Marsh? I hadn't until very recently. Written in 1865, his Man and Nature counts actually as the first environmentalist book in English, a century before Cobb's Is It Too Late? Marsh writes, I quote, "Man is everywhere a disturbing agent to the natural world." And in fully secular language, Marsh names the deterioration of the earth. So let me share this bit of his 455-page book with you. And no, I haven't read a whole lot of it yet, but a chunk. So he is addressing a public that presumes the nobility of man above all other creatures, of course. And this is what he writes. "The earth is fast becoming an unfit home for its noblest inhabitant, and another era of equal human crime and human improvidence would reduce it to such a condition of impoverished productiveness, of shattered surface, of climatic excess, as to threaten the deprivation, barbarism, and perhaps even extinction of the species, ours. And yes, that is the first known use of the notion of climatic excess. Marsh's primary example of this crime is the felling of the American forests. He tracks closely the services the forests provide, especially in terms of how they mitigate extremes of hot and cold, and how, in particular, they cool their surroundings. The deterioration of the earth, above all through the felling of the trees, describes what he calls Earth's becoming unfit, and eventually what he calls Earth's vengeance, in terms of inhabitability. When Marsh warns of the deterioration and vengeance of the earth, his apocalypse is not at all histrionic in tone, also not when he pronounces the possibility of a new creation. And in that utterly secular new creation, our built environment, built then largely of wood, would live in mindful balance with the unbuilt environment. So Marsh presses the possibility of restraint in the cutting and of new protection and restoration. In other words, the possibility of humanity becoming what he calls a planter of woods. The planter of a wood must be actuated, he writes, by higher motives than those of an investment, the profits of which consist in direct pecuniary gain to himself or even to his posterity. Let me stay with his language. Given the terrible evils necessarily resulting from the destruction of the trees, both the preservation of existing woods and the far more costly extension of them where they have been unduly reduced, are among the most obvious of the duties which this age owes to those that are to come after it. Especially is this obligation incumbent upon Americans. End of quote. In other words, the knowledge of ecological destruction and of its economic drivers has been very lucidly available since at least 1865. So ignorance is no national excuse for us. But as it happens, many trillions of trees were saved through the broad influence of Marsh's book. Federal forest management dates back to 1876, just a decade after he wrote, when the U.S. Congress created the Office of Special Agent in the Department of Agriculture to assess the quality and conditions of U.S. forests. This led to the establishment of the U.S. Forest Service in 1905. Right, the one that's being almost shut down, and the National Forest System, evolving from a focus on timber production to include conservation and recreation. But now, as that climatic excess becomes ever more relentless, the old U.S. protections against forest cutting are themselves getting cut, along with drastic cuts to the protection of the oceans, the skies, the earth, the species. So it does seem that much of the matter of the earth, the matter of its life, our mattering life, the life of human civilization too, is at stake. In other words, the metaphor of apocalypse isn't going to go away, but it will take new forms, signified by that mere degree or two, that tiny bit of difference between the 2.5-degree rise and that devastating third. Such abstract little numbers. How can they compete for attention, not just with our own charged daily struggles, But with the mass suffering in the nightly news, mass human suffering, Ukraine, Gaza, US immigrants, ... Where might we take Marsh's appeal then to higher motives? Appealing to our different publics to obey moral imperatives or ecological ethics doesn't seem to be working. Can theology help more? Theologically speaking, conservative Christians continue to pound the drum of man's dominion, our right to do what we want to with the earth. But the longtime Christian alternative has stressed that dominion must be translated, given the Genesis emphasis on tilling and keeping the earth, as responsible stewardship. But eco-theologians, certainly process theologians, found stewardship language also too human-centered. So what about higher motives? Theological presumptions often backfire for our natural environment, such as the valuing of an immaterial supernaturalism over all nature, a discarnate spirit, and even more, the presumption of divine omnipotence. Well, you know where I'm going. That God who controls everything, the great guy in the sky, not our problem in process thought. He may have everything predetermined in advance, or he may leave us free to obey with just enough rope to hang ourselves. And if we beg hard, maybe he will intervene to fix the problem. So the question perennially arises, spoken or unspoken, if God is in control, then why should we worry about the environment? What happens is all part of God's mysterious plan, isn't it? Or since much Christianity comes with deep disregard for the material universe, the creation seems mainly a means to the end of an immaterial paradise or of a supernatural new creation. So much religious as well as secularized presumption treats matter as merely instrumental, as inherently flat and lifeless, as in matter just not really intrinsically mattering. So in order to release those higher motives, we do need a livelier grasp of matter itself, don't we? Of all that we call nature, a matter that is not something flat and lifeless until it gets injected with life by God or by our genes. A mattering matter that is not the stuff our civilization teaches us to exploit greedily on the one hand and to transcend spiritually on the other. Hence the all too successful US merger of voracious capitalism with white conservative Christianity. And as you all know, we don't have to imagine this lively alternative matter from scratch. When Whitehead withdrew from mathematics to write a philosophy befitting the emerging world of relativity and quantum physics, he fostered a sense of matter alien to our civilization. His sense of its universe is as radically relational. Every being, every creature, from electronic pulses to each of you here now, is an event of interconnection. Every actual entity composes itself at every moment out of its relation to the world. We are all constantly becoming in and through our environing relations. And every creature, human, animal, vegetal, even quantum, experiences, not for the most part consciously, but feelingly. Nature is alive. So Whitehead defined the universe as a solidarity of all its actual entities. And he wrote, "We find ourselves in a buzzing world amidst a democracy of fellow creatures." Profoundly proto-ecological language, isn't it? And poignant in this time of threat to human democracy, as well as to all those fellow creatures. So this century-old philosophy anticipates where some recent science has gone. We are learning, for instance, that in very material ways, trees can be said to communicate, even to care. The paleontologist Tim Flannery writes about how social they are. Trees, he writes, in a forest care for each other, sometimes even going so far as to nourish the stump of a felled tree for centuries after it was cut down, thus keeping it alive. In 2013, Eduardo Kohn wrote a book called How Forests Think, demonstrating that trees, like us, live with and through signs. In 2015, the German forester Peter Wohlleben wrote The Hidden Life of Trees with the subtitle, What They Feel, How They Communicate. Oddly democratic, their well-being, he shows. It depends on the community that surrounds them, on the forest. He finds in them a lively exchange, an underground equalization through their roots, he calls it. It is through their roots that they communicate with each other, apparently through vibrations mediated by fungi. And by the way, fungi are also coming into the news. A major, very recent article in The Guardian was titled, The Earth's Secret Miracle Worker is not a plant or an animal, it's fungi. Underground fungal threads known as mycelium connect the roots of plants, allowing them to share nutrients and to communicate through chemical signals. They are touching each other through those fungal vibrations. Scientists refer to this network as the wood wide web. Process theology anticipates such botanical disclosures, doesn't it? We have long had a nuanced language for insisting that while non-human creatures communicate, indeed, excuse me, indeed relate to each other with awareness, we are not claiming that, for instance, trees and other plants are conscious. We always have to repeat that. But yes, sentient. And every actual occasion arises from the love that we call the lure, the eros to materialize more fully. That lure plants itself in every creature and may be perhaps recognized as what Marsh called higher motive. The divine source of the lure signifies the supreme case, not of power, but of relation. It or he or she or they represents the wisdom or the lure of possibility. The divine invites everyone, everything, to participate responsibly in the creativity of the universe. So this process, materiality, echoes the original meaning of solidarity, as in the French solidaire, meaning interdependence. Because the universe is a solidarity, how we materialize moment to moment matters to our highest and our widest world. They are materializing. So not accidentally did the first book-length Christian eco-theology flow in 1972 from a Whiteheadian pen. Is it too late? To that apocalyptic question, John Cobb gave no final answer by the time he died this December, unless one of you knows something I do not. I went to study him in the 70s because of a different book, Christ in a Pluralistic Age, 1975. Its chapter called City of God opens claiming that we are surrounded by multiplying signals that our civilization cannot continue in the directions of its recent past. It has been based upon economic growth, and growth has now become self-destructive. And he goes on to say, there are indications that pollution may be changing planetary weather. Yeah, 1975. The chapter focuses on the architect Paolo Soleri. Soleri had developed dozens of plans for whole cities, arcologies, he called them, short for architectural ecologies. Each would be an enclosed organic unit, spreading up as much as out, taking 1% of the land space normally occupied by a comparable population, and with plenty of living room for humans and for the natural environment. But only the base of an arcology ever got built. It's in the Arizona desert, where a bunch of us drove out to it from Claremont, I think around 1980, to speak with Soleri. Cobb's 1976 book also calls for a religious pluralism in which the different traditions become not one, but interdependent, solidaire. Cobb developed, for example, a Buddhaized Christianity, a way that empties out the Christian supremacism amplified by the Western ego and its consuming imperialisms. So Cobb, of course, never abandons the Nazarene way, even as that way 2 millennia ago was crossing a very different earth. As for the cross, I realized this Good Friday that we may want to think differently about its wood. It's a huge wooden cross there in my church, carried by about 8 people that Good Friday. Jesus is said several times in scripture to have been hung on a tree, kazulon in Greek. Crucifixions, of course, belong to the Roman Empire's built environment. And maybe now we can glimpse a kind of solidarity of crucified teacher and dead tree. The deity incarnate on the cross and in every single creature as its initial aim, its lure, its higher motive. Such a deity is not going to step in to fix our failures. We know that, we process folk. In its cosmic wisdom, its Sophia, she, he, it, they, incarnates as a natural body in solidarity with everybody. It offers a way, perhaps an inspiration, but no guarantee, a hope. And hope is not the same as optimism. Optimism presumes a good outcome. Hope tunes to possibility amidst uncertainty, the hope of a new creation, the new city, these ancient prophecies of the new Jerusalem, the new atmosphere and earth. And we do need hope, heartening enough to motivate action. Because, yeah, without it, why bother? So actually, I've been glad to be heading very soon, very, very soon, into a conversation at a convent about Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard was focused on the future much more than was Whitehead. And it has been too easy for me and other Whiteheadians to dismiss his hope as mere optimism, as a certainty that our species will ultimately reach the omega point, the aim of the universe, whereas process theology has only the moment-by-moment aims, no single telos. Teilhard can seem also too anthropocentric, so of little help to ecology. Yet his thought is grounded in natural science and is full of the life of all terrestrials. Humans, for him, do have a very special destiny. But actually, I find as I actually read him, no guarantee at all. We are called into an ultimate communion to the all in all that he names the Omega. but it is not a point, let alone some fixed point of future. And it actually functions very much like a process lure. What he calls the divine milieu is that to which, and already in some sense in which, we are called, and sounds at times much like the consequent nature of God, except that in it we retain our own consciousness immortally. Well, that certainly has appeal. Perhaps what I most want from Teilhard for my process theology right now is a dose of the Omega hope, the confidence, confides, with faith, the confidence that enough of our species is moving in the right direction, just enough that we have a real chance of outgrowing the avarice and hierarchy and eco-social destruction of global capitalism, a real possibility of transmuting our technologically hyper-developed globality into a true planetarity. Teilhard uses globality and planetarity as very good words. I am not optimistic, but I do retain hope. At this moment, planetarity is helped by new eco-solidarities with Roman Catholicism. Leo may well carry on the legacy of Francis' care for our common home. And like Francis in Laudato Si, Leo has been known to cite that, until quite recently, hereticized Teilhard. So I can't help thinking of every actual occasion as its own, its own alpha omega event. The alpha as the divine lure, what Cobb identifies as the cosmic logos, and the omega as what the consequent nature enfolds of the occasion, its objective immortality. Not a matter of a single alphabetical line from beginning to end of the world, but a vast unfolding of galactic spirals filled with the interconnecting spirals of the micro events that are making up the future now as we speak, and in some teensy tiny way through our speaking together. And of course, this omega is not a point, but it's a portal, just as the Greek letter illustrates, omega. It looks just like a portal, doesn't it? A portal into a new creation, the newness of cosmic creativity. And let us recall that the ancient symbol of the new creation, like the Genesis creation, does not teach some final creation from nothing. But what about the trees? Well, as Burrus and Pierce, two historians of ancient Christianity, write about some very early church fathers' view, humanity emerged from the same primeval soil as trees did in Genesis. On some level, then, the descendants of Adam and Eve are related to those of the tree of life and the other plants of Eden, or so some Christian writers think. Basil, they're especially thinking of. And so we are materially related to the trees and all the other creatures of both Genesis and of the New Jerusalem. Seems to me that this ancient view implies that the tree of life of the Garden of Eden does not die, but at least ultimately spreads, even across the river of the New Jerusalem. That utopian city, of course, appears the very end of the Bible as a built environment, bright like gems, multicolored. Yet through the city's center flows a river. And Revelation says a tree grows on either side of the river. So that tree is surely actually many. It's as though the tree of life at the opening of the Bible returns in the end as a forest, even an urban forest. Natural and built environments appear in an ultimate solidarity, an eschatological arcology. That, of course, would be a fully redeemed earth. But doesn't redemption mean something very close to recycling? A saving that is the opposite of wasting? So maybe we're called into a redemptive solidarity that recycles so much otherwise wasted life, wasted matter, wasted gifts, wasted democracy. Of course, in the present climates of apocalypse, the trumping of democracy is just getting started, we fear. It threatens, in turn, to waste the whole democracy of fellow creatures. But however badly trumped our shared present may seem, process teaches us to work with the trash. The human home is under threat, but threat is not destiny so much as disclosure, a warning with apocalyptic hot flashes. Those warnings, those openings may disclose rather than close down our common home, our chance at eco-civilization. Connective care could replace both denialism and nihilism. Marcia's old higher motives could kick in more universally, higher motives that root us deep down into the matter of the earth. From our process theology, we draw an endless creativity happening in every microcosm of the cosmos, inviting our mindful conspiracy with the non-human. Together with the Teilhard and Omega, we might tune the microcosm better to the macrocosm of our evolving planetarity. Hope for EcoCiv surely depends on micro and macro solidarity. So fresh reasons for hope do keep sprouting. I'll wrap up with a couple of almost random brief examples. I just read in the Times, the New York Times, that LA is planting trees to supercharge childhood development, getting going on a tree canopy for schools and parks in the understanding that right now roughly 20% of the city's total canopy is concentrated in 5 primarily white and affluent areas that are home to just 1% of the city's population. Groups like Amigos de los Rios are trying to close that gap. Green spaces make a huge difference in what you become and what's available to you, said the director of Amigos de los Rios, Claire Robinson, who founded Amigos in 2003 to address environmental disparities on the east side of LA County. And more broadly, as to the trumping of US democracy and ecology, it's heartening to realize that, at least as of last night, street protests have been happening every single day in this country since the inauguration, and have happened and continue to in all 50 states. Yes, the US is being driven backward by Trump's denialist aggression. Yet, to go even more broadly, we now learn that India recently overtook Germany to become the world's 3rd largest generator of renewable power. And the European Union, where greenhouse gas emissions have been falling, is now generating 11% of its electricity from solar power this year, surpassing coal for the first time. Again, these are reasons not for a reassuring optimism, but for active hope. Reasons to throw off the paralysis of pessimism, to counter doomsday with the apocalypsis of disclosure, the twist of the vicious spiral of the climate and political doom into an open spiral of terrestrial renewal. As the author of The Mother Tree, Suzanne Simard writes, "We have the power to shift course. It's our disconnectedness and lost understanding about the amazing capacities of nature that's driving a lot of our despair. And plants in particular are objects of our abuse. By understanding their sentient qualities," she writes, "our empathy and love for trees, plants, and forests will naturally deepen and find innovative solutions. Turning to the intelligence of nature is itself key," she writes. And that turn, I would add, requires the risky fullness of our imagination. Otherwise, we cannot release our empathy and our understanding will shut down. So maybe our understanding needs to keep standing under some trees. As Mary Elizabeth Moore has written in relation to systemic violence, I would risk hoping that our imaginative knowing will make all the difference. Amen, say the trees. Process thought surely counts as one immense and still growing example of imaginative knowing. And there is no more deep and broad and natural account of our mutually sentient becoming, our interbecoming, than we find in the process cosmology. And perhaps the cosmogenesis of Omega, when we imagine it as an open portal of now time and not a point at the end of time, helps assuage our fear of the future, a macro future that lives only as a possibility of this micro moment is what we have, and a possibility of this moment's process. We can keep deep rooting our understanding in the ground of our actual environments. We can touch each other through our own vibrating roots, maybe even through AI. And we can keep branching out to share this process connectedness with whatever publics we have access to in care for the common home and for the common good, for the sake of the matter, really mattering, of EcoCiv amidst the wood wide web. And I'd suggest sitting under an old mother tree whenever you have a chance. Thank you. Look forward to our conversation.
Catherine, that was exquisite. And it was challenging in every aspect of life. Thank you so very much. I